Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director for the museum. Aerospace history is replete with stories of the impressive work of visionaries, many of whom lent their names to the great companies they founded. But much of the story of this magnificent history is really the story of the second generation of visionaries. The second wave was made up of people who not only shared the founders' visions, they also possessed the technical intellect and business acumen to build their companies into the real techno-industrial powerhouses we know today. And so, we are privileged to have a member of that vital second wave, a man who understood the unique nature of the company he joined, but who also understood the real-world environment into which the company was to thrive and grow. I am, of course, talking about Ken Richardson, who guided the company that had grown from one of the great early visionaries and built it into the technological and industrial powerhouse we knew as Hughes Aircraft. It's a fascinating story, and today Ken has agreed to share that with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Richardson.
Thank you, Cindy. Should have got you to write the introduction to this book I'm going to tell you about. That's well written. Thank you very much. I'm not sure I deserve the compliments, but certainly the company does. I hope that most of you noticed or know that when you came in here, you noticed the name Zamparini. Famous person. He came from Torrance. He did some magnificent things before World War II and during that terrible period. He has been captured in a terrific book, which is a bestseller called The Unbroken. I highly recommend you have a look at it. One of the reasons for bringing that up is, of course, I'm trying to hustle another book. I don't really think it'll be a bestseller for the public, but I do hope it'll be a bestseller for the aerospace community, and especially those people in the second wave and today's third wave who might be interested in the history of what we all did, which absolutely miraculous things that we did. And I said bestseller, but what I really mean is great circulation for this book. I've got such an investment in it, I'm never going to make any money on it. But we do hope that most of the country, at least, will be able to share the history that we did. This museum, as you see, has many things from Northrop because it was begun by Northrop folk. Our company, that I'll tell you more about, began teaming or working for and with Northrop in 1945. We designed a missile called the Tiamat missile. It was a semi-active radar-guided missile to defend the JB-1 Bat, which was a Northrop single-wing device. We built and tested 3 of them. They all worked very successfully. It was really the first air-to-air guided missile. You might say, why was it called Tiamat? There was an old Babylonian goddess who was quite overweight, and she was really very fierce, and anybody that saw her would die. That's why we named the missile that, because that fits, a fitting name. So then we worked with them, of course, on the F-89. We built about 2,000 radars to make that an excellent interceptor vehicle. We then worked on the Snark. There's a Snark over there, although I told it wasn't really, but it's a copy of the Snark, I'll say, which was a surface-launched cruise missile. We built the Star Tracker, which kept it on course so it knew where it was going. Next was the FIA-18. We built the radar for that. I have my heart and soul in that since I was deeply involved in its creation. It turned out to be the most successful program that Hughes ever had from a monetary standpoint because many, many were built, and we did make a few dollars on those. Then, of course, Tacit Blue, the stealth test vehicle, and the B-2. We had the radar, have the radar in the B-2. I'll tell you more about that. Now, Northrop also is now team part of Grumman, or the other way around. Grumman has 12 years of my personal history because I was deeply involved in the F-111B, called the Flying Edsel, which never went into production because the Navy really didn't want, which was being stuffed down their throat by an unnamed Secretary of Defense. And then following that was the F-14 Tomcat. Also has my heart and soul in it for many reasons. I flew it twice. I had a lot to do with the creation of the content of that, which was a weapon system that's never been done since or before, which had the ability to fire 6 weapons simultaneously at targets widely spaced as many as 50 miles apart and 50 miles or 100 miles distant, and hit every one of them from a single airplane. So again, Grumman has a lot of my heart and soul in it. And my favorite movie, by the way, is Top Gun, if you ever want to have a look at it. I wish I'd been in it. Now, many people at Northrop also came from North America and Rockwell. We had a lot to do with them too, because the F-108 was a Mach 3 interceptor that we had the weapon control system and the missile for. And that got canceled, unfortunately, because of lack of funding. And we then converted to the SR-71. And the interceptor version of that was called the YF-12, had a lot to do with that. So anyway, our company has some strong ties with the people who created this museum and who are currently almost #1 in the business. How many of you are pilots? A whole bunch. Good. Well, this is a piloting place. It's all about airplanes. I see one out there I know quite well, Buzz Elliott. He's an ex-Marine pilot. Whoops. I was told never say ex-Marine, always say former Marine. But I want to tell you 3 airplane stories having to do with me, because I'm an ex-pilot. Not a very good one. Now, usually when you hear about pilots, they're telling you the great wonders and miracles they did right at the edge and unbeatable, that sort of thing. And that's good, because that's stimulating. I'm going to tell you some on the other side of it. First one has to do with blind luck. And it's really not funny, but in retrospect, I'm very glad it happened the way it did. I went out to the carrier Kitty Hawk in the Gulf of Tonkin during the Vietnam War to observe operations, bring back that story to our company so we made better stuff than we would have otherwise, because you got to know how it's operated. More importantly, you have to know the people that operate those things, what they think and how they perform. Then you can change your design to make it more suitable. We were out there, 2 of us were out there for about 3 days. We were then supposed to cycle back to QB Point in the Philippines, which is a 3.5-hour flight in a C-2 COD aircraft. Well, after the 3rd day, couldn't do it because all those airplanes were downed for engine problems. All of them. So there was no communication with any of the carriers by carrier onboard delivery aircraft. We waited and waited and waited. After the second night, during the second night, we were told, wake up every 2 hours, come on up, see if we're ready to shoot you off, because we think the airplane might get here. So every 2 hours you get up. Well, finally, just about dawn, came up there, said, yep, ready to go. It came in. And it turns out that the airplane had arrived the previous evening, excuse me, but upon landing, it had an engine failure. So there were a dozen guys working on it, mechanics, to fix that engine. They'd just finished it at 5:30 in the morning. Here we were, now ready to go. Get on. The guy said, get on that damn airplane. We got to get it out of here because we're going to launch a strike. Get on that airplane. There was no testing, no quality control, no nothing. Well, we got on the airplane, and fortunately, we got that 3.5-hour trip behind us and got back to QB Point. Here's the bad news and the blind luck that I enjoyed. That's a bad word again. The next week, that very same airplane went down halfway back to QB Point and lost everybody aboard. including 2 senior officers of the Navy. So that was pure luck. The next one, I mentioned I had 2 flights in the F-14. They were in the back seat. I wasn't flying it, but I was operating our system. One of those was very successful. We did do simulated missile launches, both successful. Those were launched the next day, by the way, Phoenix missiles, and they both hit the target, naturally. But the other test, the second one, it wasn't quite so successful. We were making something called a head-up display. And this is a thing you have on your helmet. The screen comes down, and let's say you just have a pair of crosshairs there. Either the front seat or the back seat can now look at a target, push a button, and all of the sensors, including the missiles, will be slewed to that line of sight. So you don't have to look at the controls, you don't have to punch this and then you just go bang like that. The problem was to decide or find out what the variation in look angle would be as the canopy increases and decreases as you change altitude. It swells a little bit, it goes down and so forth. So you got to measure that, then compensate by computer for that deviation. Okay, well I got the great job of being that person to find that out. So I sit in the back seat, put that heavy helmet on. We got up to about 25,000 feet, then did a very slow ascent to 40,000 feet. That gets quite a bit of canopy expansion, as you can imagine. My job was to look about that angle at an F-8 target that was flying with us and keep my head locked on that for about 10 minutes while I can still feel it, while we went up to 40,000 feet. And then bang, that test is over. And then the F-8 went to the other side of us, and we did a very slow descent from 40 back to 25,000 feet. So now I'm like this. Oh, I just cracked again. I'll tell you, that is a difficult thing to do because you're under pressure to make sure you don't wiggle, you don't do this. You just hold on steady. Well, I thought I did a good job. However, due to lack of information, I didn't have the system switched on. Now, that wasn't just ignorance. For those of you who are pilots, you know that normally switches, when you push them forward, it means on or more. When you push it back, it's the opposite way. Same thing up and down. Up means on, down means off. Okay, this switch to activate the tape recorder, here I am in this all this gear. I couldn't turn around and see it. I had to reach around like this because it was a temporary switch. So I reached up there. Well, it turns out I put it on neutral instead of turning it on because it had been wired upside down. On was down. Oh. So here's that wasted effort and a sore neck for 20 years, 40 years, to no avail. So what's the point of that message? Make sure you know what you're doing before you go up there. Okay, now the last one, and I'm going to get to my real story here in a minute. I'm trying to get you relaxed. The last story is I was a real dumb pilot. Did stupid things. I've got such a long list of them, I won't bore you with them all, but the final one was, and final is the right word, when I reached about 1,000 hours, this was with private airplane flying, I had this objective of landing at every airport in California, and obviously taking off from it as well. And I got up to 158, I think it was, of the about 350 at the time. The final one was I'd just done 2 or 3 others in Northern California, and I came up to the one in Eureka, which is called Samoa Airport. It was an old Navy field back in World War II for blimps and other short-range machines, anti-submarine. Well, here's what, I was so stupid. I didn't look at the chart ahead of time to find out the runway length. There was no communication with the ground to find out what the wind condition was. I looked down and I saw the windsock, which came straight across the field, and it was absolutely horizontal like that. I knew the side load, or the side wind force, side wind limit for this airplane was about 15, maybe 20 knots. Well, that thing was staying up more than that. I should have said, I don't think I'll try this. But I said, well, what the heck, try it. So I came down, as you probably know, when you got a crosswind, you sort of steer into the wind as you come. Here's the runway. And at the last second, you flip it over like that, touch down, and there you're all set. Well, the trouble was I used up half of the runway, And I said, ooh, I'm not going to make it. So full throttle, started to put the gear up, didn't quite make it. Hit a sand dune at the end, almost killed myself. I was in the hospital for 2 months. So what's the lesson there? Don't do something stupid because you're going to kill yourself. Fortunately, I got rescued, even though I had 2 cut arteries, a whole bunch of other stuff, and so on and so forth. So those are my 3 airplane stories. History has about 4 reasons for being studied. One of those, of course, is entertainment. You'd be titillated to read about Thomas Jefferson and how many children he had and who was the mothers. It's a fascinating, entertaining story. Another one is for education. I was taught, and many people in this hemisphere are taught, that Europeans invented the printing press, and the Egyptians invented newspaper, or paper, sorry. Wrong. Chinese did it way ahead of our times. Okay, so education is good because you're going to find out the right thing, maybe. The next reason is nostalgia. Charlotte and I did a marvelous trip for 3 days on a recreated Oregon Trail in Nebraska. Now that trail is a significant thing to the development of this country. If you were a Native American, you'd say, those rascals shouldn't have come, and I agree with them. But nonetheless, we did. 300,000 people went across, walking all the way from St. Louis to Oregon or California. And to recreate what it felt like is quite an amazing thing. To read about it and really understand what happened is a bit of nostalgia. And the last piece of why history is inspiration. You can read about Charles Lindbergh, who just barely made it over those trees when he took off from that airport in New York because the airplane was so heavy. You can read about Einstein and what made him think and how he created the wonders he did. History is portrayed in many ways. One is preservation of buildings. In the case of our company, our motherland was Culver City. And fortunately, 11 of those buildings still remain. And Mr. Ratkovich, who is a developer, is going to redevelop those buildings to look as they used to and to be available for lease. The next thing is a display of artifacts. Here we are. This place is going to expand, build another building, which hopefully will contain a lot of Hughes artifacts. Another third way to do histories is oral recitations, oral histories. There's an organization between USC and the Huntington Library to get those oral histories from people who are about to pass away. Well, that's very important because the period covered is the golden era of aerospace, when the most magnificent changes were made, and that's that period of the last half of the last century. A fourth way, of course, is by written documents and books. That's what this book is about. It's the history of Hughes Aircraft Company. It's very difficult to write histories because, obviously, they're in the eye of the beholder. I wrote what I saw, but also had help from 90 other people who used to work for the company to make sure it was technically correct and comprehensive enough. But it's still very difficult because words are the words as the events as I saw them. Now think about several things in the past. Think about, I just talked about the Oregon Trail, but think of the Battle of Little Bighorn, how that is portrayed in history. Up until recently, it's made to look like the U.S. forces were really overwhelmed unfairly by the Native Americans, the Sioux Plains Indians, so forth and so on. Well, it turns out we had 300 people, the Indians, 3,000. This guy, Custer, decided to attack them, which was kind of dumb. But the thing is, think about it. If you were the Native Americans defending your own soil, you would count this as a major victory. You annihilated all those guys. Well, I think it was too, and I'm on their side. Now, at the time, which side I would have been on, I'm not sure. A couple of things that are difficult about Hughes Aircraft Company is the public wants to know about Howard Hughes. They don't care about much else. Okay, so you got to put some of that in there. And I've got some good teasers about that, things you've never heard before. I didn't make them up, they're true, I think. Which is another problem. A lot of stuff is made up, but I think this is all accurate. Now, so that's a problem. Another problem is just anything with the name Howard Hughes means mystery. You can't tell about it. Well, okay, maybe so. What's another thing? Aerospace. This is we were part of aerospace history. That's a marvelous word. But the public thinks of aerospace as airplanes with these Tiger fighter pilots, that kind of stuff. Really noble stuff. You think about Chuck Yeager's first supersonic level full-powered flight. So the problem is they think about the airplanes. They think about the spacecraft, but only if there are people in them. Here, the last space shuttle is up there, and the country's all saying, oh my gosh. But it turns out that the science in space, the same things can be determined at 1/3 the cost and about half the time if you do it without people aboard. But the thing is, stimulates economies, money expending and all that sort of thing, and enthusiasm by the people if it's people-oriented. Okay, in writing this book, I tried to do a lot about that. What is the history of the company? We were begun in 1932 by Howard Hughes. He had a lot of money because he had inherited his father's estate. He'd made a lot of money initially in the movie industry, so he had something to invest. One of his features internally was, I want to make sure whatever I do is the best, the biggest, the fastest, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of nice for we who inherited his company to always try to reach beyond. Okay, in the next 12 years, he created 4 aircraft, none of which went into production, but they were all the best. The first was the H-1 Racer, created a world speed record, 100 miles an hour faster than any previous airplane. Its design had 15 unique things in it, most of which were copied by the Japanese in the Zero, which was the best airplane in 1940. Our airplane companies didn't do any copying of it. Hey, Northrop, why didn't you take some of those ideas earlier? It took us years to adopt it because we were so conservative. But nonetheless, then he took that airplane and expanded, lengthened the wings a bit, and set a cross-country speed record. So that's his first airplane. The next was called the XF-11. It was a photo reconnaissance aircraft for the Army Air Force, all made out of wood, except for the engines. And that's the one, two of them were made, and the first one is the one he crashed and almost killed himself. The next one was what everybody calls the spruce goose. It wasn't made out of spruce, but it was made out of wood because the idea was to conserve strategic materials during World War II. That was the biggest airplane ever built. There have been 2 aircraft that are longer in fuselage length, 1 aircraft with a bigger wingspan, but collectively for mass, it was 400,000 pounds at takeoff. Nobody's ever done that. It's still available to see up at McMinnville, Oregon. You can actually go in it and sit on the cockpit seat and put on Howard Hughes' hat and be photographed. Terrific. So I highly recommend it if you like Howard Hughes. If you don't like Howard Hughes, you don't have to put the hat on. The next one was the largest helicopter in the world, of which 2 were built. One crashed in early testing, and the other one was quite successful. And its rotor was 104 feet in diameter. The thing that was unique is the engine was down in the fuselage. There was hot gas piped up through that out to the end of the rotor blades and jet nozzles at the end of the blade, which flipped around. It had 2 problems. One is, if you heard of stealth, and I'll come to that, you could hear it about 3 miles away. So if this was an attack helicopter, it's supposed to be carrying tanks, you'd know the darn thing was coming, and that's not very good. I did see it fly, and I'm practically hard of hearing right as a result. Still, the other thing was that the tips reached supersonic speed and could not be supported because of the flutter that were resolved. So it was not a successful design, but it did fly, and it was the largest ever. So once again, In 12 years, 4 airplanes, no production. During the war, in 1940, he decided to move facilities from Glendale, Burbank, to Culver City, which then became our motherland, as I say often, because those big buildings were built at that time, including, by the way, the largest wooden structure in the world, the hangar there, the longest private runway. So once again, it's always the best, the best, the best. Isn't that nice? So we moved there in 1940. And by the time the war was ripe, there were about 6,000 employees. Most of the time they're making sub-assemblies for other aircraft companies. And they did invent a good chute for machine gun belts, which was used in practically every system. And I noticed in the F5 right here, there's some feeder chutes that are in the front end of the thing to guide the weapons, ammunition down into the gun. Guess who designed that? Anyway, so that was the principal operation. Now, in 1946, a person named Dr. Simon Ramo and his associate Dean Wooldridge, Dr. Dean Wooldridge, came from Bell Labs and GE and started up a new enterprise. This was with the urging of the US Air Force, because at the time, the government was very concerned about attack from the Soviets with mass raids of bombers. We needed interceptors which could do the job at a long range, find the targets, and obviously be successful. So you need 2 things. One is good radars in those airplanes, and you need a guided missile. So we began design of excellent intercept radars. Now, in the case of Northrop, as I said, we built F-89 radar. I think about 2,000 of those, 2,200, something like that, all very successful. In 1953, this was going on, and many other things we had started to do, but the US Air Force, a guy named Secretary Talbot, became very annoyed at Howard Hughes on the way he was running the business. Basically, that was a problem. He was not running the business. He was in charge. He had the authority. He did not transmit that authority to other subordinates to do the job. So many things were floating, were not decided, never done. So Talbot came out to Culver City and he said, "Look, Mr. Hughes, you either fix up this place or we're going to cancel all the contracts we have with you." And Howard said, "You can't do that to me." He says, "Yes, I can. I've got the money. What you've got to do is withdraw yourself from management of this company and withdraw all of the operating controls and put somebody in who can do the job properly." Well, Howard didn't believe it, but there were several subsequent events that forced him to do something. So he donated the company to the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. He also then participated in hiring a new manager, a guy named Pat Hyland. Pat then was teamed with 2 other guys, Alan Puckett, one of the best technical people ever seen in the world. He was one of the ones, he was an aerodynamicist that designed the best guided missile ever done, and everybody else is copying now. And John Richardson. I always called him the real Richardson. I was the fake one. And he was one of the best marketing people that the world's ever known. There's a team of people then that created a new way to design and work a new business, which was electronics. And during the next few years, when Howard Hughes was gone, fortunately, for all his obstructive work, we became what was called a national treasure, the #1 military electronics contractor in the world, 85,000 employees, of whom 22,000 were engineers and scientists. We had annual sales about $12 billion. That doesn't seem like much today, but if you multiply due to inflation, it is quite a large number. Extremely successful. When Mr. Hughes died in '76, it created a big furor in the federal government for a lot of reasons. One is, as you know, he was intestate. Nobody knew who was going to gain the results of his empire. But also, further investigation was done at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is a charitable organization that spends all of its money on medical research. It was the primary and single owner of Hughes Aircraft Company. Now that looks something funny to the tax people. We, as a company, paid full corporate taxes, just like everyone else did. Our competitors didn't think so, but we really did. The difference was that our dividends could be divided between the Medical Institute and reinvestment in research. Oh, that's wonderful. Got a rich load of research money to keep going and to break those boundaries. Well, the federal government decided, HHMI, you can't do that. You have to diversify. You have to have many, many investments to support yourself. You cannot be a sole owner. It took about 5 years in the courts to settle that, and we were then auctioned off. There were 5 competitors in the auction, and General Motors won. We were sold to General Motors by HHMI for $5.2 billion. Once again, a minuscule number now, but the largest number for such a transaction in U.S. history. During that era, the GM era, we suffered a little bit, which I'll tell you more about, mostly due to the fact the defense business was going downhill, but also a bigger emphasis on profit, which was not our objective previously. Technology. Now we had to be more profitable and more aware of where all the money went. That was not fun, and that was quite a change. Now, but other than that, they didn't change much of the management structure. We could function as we had before. Now, another government action then came, which was more liquid assets are required to support the benefit awards that you give. So General Motors, you cannot have, let's call it a stock market set of benefits for your people. You've got to have more liquid assets, in other words, cash, to make sure it's there. So the amount of cash needed by General Motors was enormously increased. So they decided to start liquidating some of their subsidiaries. We got liquidated, and that's the right word for it. We got dismembered into 3 pieces. 70% of it was bought by Raytheon. About 30%, no, that's not right, about 15% bought by Boeing. That was the spacecraft design and development. And the balance was DirecTV, which was bought by News Corp. We did everything that was possible in electronics. If you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, you'll see it go through at the bottom, radio, TV. Then you come to radars. There's 9 classes of radars based on their frequency type, different applications. Then comes up infrared. Then you get to the visible spectrum. Then you get ultraviolet, X-rays, and more than that. So in each of these, we did some remarkable thing. Time doesn't permit telling you those, but boy, I'd sure like to. Nonetheless, we had a wide spectrum of products. Some people count it as 1,200 products, some 12,000 products, depending on the way you count them. I would like to cite just 2, however, which were super complex. One is guided missiles. Much of my heart and soul is in guided missile. What is a guided missile? It's everything. It has to be able to fly, so it's got aerodynamics. Has to have a very agile control system, 10 times more responsive than that in an airplane. It's got to have a sensor to look to see where it's going. It's got to have a warhead to do something effective when it gets near the target. It's got to have a brain to tell it where to steer and how to get there. There's a lot of complexity in one of those things. It's got to have its own power supply, usually a hydraulic system, a whole bunch of things. So it takes expertise from every facet of technology to get it to work. I proudly say, with some braggadocio, that we were the best missile people in the world. Others might dispute that, but I don't think they can. Incidentally, we won about 80% of the competitions we got into. We built air-to-air guided missiles. ones that I said, could you shoot 6 at a time from a single launch vehicle and hit 6 targets? We had air to ground, surface to surface. We even had ballistic missiles because we built the guidance systems for all the Navy missiles, submarine launched missiles, ballistic missiles. So we were in every field there was, and we really topped them all. Satellites and space exploration. Once again, I believe we're number one. For a while, we had 60% of all the satellites ever launched we had done. We set up global communication. And of course, you know about DirecTV, which now has 22 million subscribers, more needed. Okay, now the book is not just filled with technology. I was going to tell you some stuff about the Gulf War, which I will if you ask a question. But the book is not just filled with technology. I made an attempt, with the help of all those 90 people, to make things understandable for anybody walking down the street could read this and understand how a radar works, how a laser works, how a satellite gets up there and how it does its job, that sort of thing, hopefully with language understandable by anybody. Why would you want to do that? Because it's fascinating stuff, and I'll give you another reason for it later. There also are people stories. I've got a set of Howard Hughes excitements, some of which operate with the ladies, but it's straightforward stuff. And some of the others on some of the piloting things that had to be done for him. So there's an array of stuff about Howard Hughes that's never been told before. There are also other people's stories about some of the businesses that we did with other countries. We equipped 26 other nations with their military systems to a great extent. And there's some funny stories about doing those. I'll just tell you one of those. I was called over to Italy to give an address at a conference, which I did. At the end of that, I was given a phone call that says, we want you at a meeting tomorrow morning. Well, I was supposed to go home that night, but I said, okay. So I went to this place, which was a medieval-looking building, this huge, huge office room. The ceiling was almost as high as this hangar. Enormous place and a big mahogany table. And there were 2 people sitting there. One was a general who was in charge of procurement for the Italian military. And the other guy I didn't know, his assistant, I guess it was. I came in there with one of my friends, one of my co-workers, team members. And I didn't know what it was about. And the general said, Mr. Richardson, we are considering buying the TOW missiles. That's the anti-tank wire-guided missile that we built. And as you know, some of the material has to be produced in Italy. All foreign sales are like that. You have to make some of the stuff there. It has to be made by local people, then integrated with your stuff to get the whole job done. This is partly for technology transfer as well as economic balance. So he says, that is the issue today. I said, okay. And he says, just wait. The door was flung open, and this beautiful, handsome Italian guy, who's about 6'4", beautiful, wavy white hair like this, actually had a cape on, came swinging into the room. He swept this cape off. I thought, I'm in the movies. And he says, in very good English, he says, how do you do, Mr. Richardson? I am the CEO of such and such a company that makes rocket motors. You must decide today that we are going to build a rocket motor for this production. Otherwise, the Italian government will not buy the missile. What a surprise. I said, oh my gosh. So I thought, and said, Mr. So-and-so, I'm sorry I can't speak Italian, but I will say you in English. I'm sorry I cannot do that. Your company has not given us a price offer. I have a price offer from the other company. I cannot sign you up without knowing what it will cost because I have signed a fixed price contract with the Italian government to supply the finished product. I cannot do this. Oh, he was so furious. He got up and stormed out of the room, and the general, here's the procurement general for the country, actually went like this. Mr. Richardson, you made a big mistake. I said, well, thank you very much. Holy mackerel, I thought, oh, Blue, this thing, which is a big business. That night, after dinner, about 8 o'clock, I got another phone call that says, please be at the front of the hotel at 7 a.m., fully dressed. I said, okay, fine. This is from an Italian person, so I said, all right, fine. Came down there, walked out of the front of the hotel, right on the Via Veneto, which is the #1 street in Rome, as you know. And here's this huge black limousine. Guy comes up, opens the door for me. Please, Mr. Richard, enter. So I did. I was sitting next to the Secretary of Defense, called something else in Italy, but in effect, the Secretary of Defense. In front of the car were 2 motorcycle police. In back of the car, 2 motorcycle police. Sirens crank up. We go roaring down the Via Veneto, all the cars spreading out on the sidewalks to get out of our way. Sirens screaming, and the secretary says, please tell me what happened. He said, I'm sorry we have to do it this way, but I have to appear before Parliament very soon. So I gave him a quick précis of what had happened. He says, thank you very much. So we got to the Parliament building. The guy opened the door for him. He did this graceful Italian, only the Italians can do it, bow. Thank you very much, Mr. Richardson. A pleasure meeting you. I said, well, I wonder what's going to come of that. The next morning, when I was just about, on the airplane, I got a phone call from back in Culver City. It says, we just got the entire award from the country of Italy. I said, holy mackerel, really? So what had happened is he'd gone and told that procurement general, look, Buster, you're going to do it by giving it to that other company, because you can't do it can't do business that way with that other guy. So it was a very interesting way to do business. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in the book. Now I'll tell you, why is it that our company was so successful and so unique? And that's my final piece here. We were playing stud poker, as you know, in this business. Competition for everything, et cetera, et cetera. Stud poker, you have 5 cards dealt to you. We had 5 aces. Well, you know, when you have 5 aces, one of them's got to be a dummy, or a fake, or a mystery, or a, what do they call it, a wild card, thank you. And of course our wild card was Howard Hughes, the name of Howard Hughes, the mystique of Howard Hughes. But more than that, for us that worked there, the thought that when you do something, do it the best, do it better than anyone has done, and in many cases, break the boundaries of people perceiving a limit to something, break over it. The second reason, the Cold War, that provided an unbounded source of funding for the kind of stuff we did. Because as you know, the game was, we talked to the Russians and said, my stuff's better than your stuff. And the Russians would say, my thing is better than your thing. Well, okay, the idea was make sure that what you said was correct. So always try to make it better. Unlimited funding to do that job. The third card, private ownership. It was a cocoon because we could put technology first, profit secondary. And you don't have to answer to a bunch of stockbrokers. You don't have to show every 3 months that you're doing something better. And you don't have to show a great gain in money all the time. Technology first. The fourth one, recruiting of absolutely superb talent. We found ways through fellowship programs to attract many people from across the country who were the best in their technical field. We even found ways to attract professors from universities or people earning their PhD whose future they thought would be in the teaching industry. Turns out we could pay them a lot more and do a lot more exciting and different things. The last one, of course, was a unique management style. The company was created sort of modeled after the Bell Telephone Laboratories. The key word is laboratories. The idea is to invent, to ask people to do things never done before, to have them unbounded in their constraints. Just go for it. So laboratory. We created a family team also of sharing ideas. If it turns out one complex device was getting in trouble technology-wise, you could cast around the company, and you usually knew all these other people, find a couple of experts that might be as remote as Fullerton to come and be assigned to help solve that problem. So it was a family sharing sort of experience. Now that made us really different. We invented some new management theories, or we improved on them: program management, system engineering. These are discrete and difficult ways to do complex things. So all in all, I think that we were a marvelous company. Now, why would you be interested in this book? One is, it is aerospace history. As I say, it's limited by the fact it's not really about airplanes. It's not about peopled spacecraft. It's about the brains, the eyes, the thought power that goes into those devices. Many people aren't interested, but I hope you would be. Next, you get a chance to find out how some of this stuff works, hopefully in a language that is understandable. I don't know why anybody doesn't want to know how a laser works. I was going to tell you about all the public benefits we've gotten from the things we did, including this thing that uses lasers. Well, how does that work? Wouldn't you like to know how that works? And hopefully it's explained in that way. Second, or third, you can find out what we did to make this miracle happen. That's really management style, people stories, and so forth. And the final reason is to be inspired, not necessarily inspire you, but to inspire your grandchildren. Unfortunately, this country is really going downhill. For 50 to 100 years, we were number one in technology advancement and development. We're now fast disappearing as being number one, and just one measure of that, due to lack of interest of the kids, lack of proper parenting, a whole bunch of reasons, we are ranked number 22 in the world in terms of mathematical achievements in school. 22nd in the world. Now, to me, the future comes from advanced technology. Separate religion, that's another issue. But from the standpoint of what people need, what people want, what people benefit from, technology. And you've got to have a place where that's inspired in the kids so that they're going to do that in the future. Thank you. Any questions? The question is, what happened during the Gulf War that Hughes items were involved in? We built 88 different products that were used in the Gulf War. And again, with a little bit of, I'll use that word again, braggadocio, it couldn't have happened without us. It was a 100-day war, the first one. And we did not only succeed in combat, but we did something more important. The most important combat thing is deterrence. When you think about the Cold War, that's what that was all about, deterrence. We never had to shoot anybody from the Soviets, vice versa. Pretty good, because it's a major deterrent. Okay, now what does that mean? 88 devices, I'll just give you a couple examples, a few examples. By the way, we did have a surveillance satellite that showed everything going on. That was all relayed back to the Pentagon. And God help us, the Pentagon could actually decide strategic moves by the commander and tell them what to do. Well, anyway, we supplied the data, the reconnaissance data to show that was all in full field. The ones that were real deterrents were, first of all, the AMRAAM missile. By the way, another museum displaying artifacts is up at Paso Robles, called the Australia Warbirds Museum. And several of us together put together the 5 generations of air-to-air guided missiles, a beautiful display. I wish that was here. But nonetheless, the AMRAAM was the last version and is currently being produced. 38 of those were launched. Everyone hit the target. Nothing failed. There was no counterfire. The guys that shot those things never got shot back at because of the range of the missile. That's a deterrent. And it was a deterrent because many of the Iraqi pilots refused to take off if they heard One of our airplanes within 100 miles of them. They refused to take off. The commanders were pretty mad about that. I don't know what they did, probably shot them. But I mean, that's a real deterrent. Okay, another deterrent. We had something called the Firefinder. This is a ground surface radar. It has electronic scan. The antenna doesn't have to flip around. It electronically scans around. And it looks for any projectile coming in any direction. You have to separate that from birds, flies, all kinds of other stuff in the air, and distinguish that it is a projectile. Once that's determined instantaneously, it tracks back its source using mathematics. Counterfire is released almost immediately and will hit that target because of the accuracy of our stuff. After a few of those, knocking out the gun emplacements that the Iraqis had, once again, the commander that we captured, one of the commanders said, my guys would refuse to fire their weapons because they knew before their weapon hit, they'd be dead. Now that is a deterrent, and that was our stuff. I could go on many others, but I say 88 devices, and I think they really did a good job. The decision to go into making a communication satellite, how did this come about? Okay, that's briefly described in there, and the first synchronous orbit satellite ever designed and built was done by us. And it was launched in 1963. It was called the Syncom. This came from the desire about our company to diversify. We were well into the interceptor field and many other fields like that, but we wanted to diversify. They thought, some of the guys thought, if we could set up a communication system using the electronic technology we had, particularly in high-frequency radars, we will be in good shape for a new business. The best way to do it is to set up a satellite which will relay this data, and on the ground you can have a very small antenna pointed at it, which never has to move, because in effect that satellite is stationary. We were successful in doing that, and that then evolved into many, many other communication satellites devices. What was Howard Hughes really like? My answer to that is nobody knows, because it's been so cloaked in both mystery, fantasy, media coverage, excitement, all this kind of stuff, which colors the facts. To have probably the best description of what he was really like is available in two documents. One is a book by Cy Ramo. I'll tell you about what his view is. Another by Jack Reel. Jack Reel ran the helicopter portion of the Hughes Tool Company, and he then became the caretaker for Hughes during the last 25 years of his life, when he had become a drug addict and all that other sort of thing. And he wrote a book describing what that was like. So there's kind of several contrasts. Okay, now what did Ramo think? Ramo thought, in effect, he was an uneducated idiot who had a whole bunch of money he didn't know how to spend properly and just was very wasteful. Every time you came and asked him a question, he wouldn't be able to answer it because he had no technical capability whatsoever. Cy Ramo's book points that out. And I had a long talk with him about that. And I said, Cy, isn't that possible that you felt that way? Because it was after he'd had his plane crash and had become a drug addict. And he didn't give me the answer. Now, Jack Reel's part would be after that effect, and the fact that he was a serious narcotics problem, plus he had other mental problems. So you can read his book. But what's the real meaning of Howard Hughes? It's a symbol. As I mentioned, it was a symbol to our team, the family that made up our company. What does that mean? A symbol of mystery. Do stuff, don't tell anybody about it. That was really good for our highly classified secret stuff. You just knew that we could do the secret stuff. So did everyone else. Mystery. Secondly, break the boundaries. Always try to do it better than anyone else ever had. That was a Howard Hughes image. Third, do it with quality. He was very demanding to make sure the thing was done with quality. And the question was, many other notable companies were started by, let's call them Hughes graduates. And how come that is? Was that because of this or that or the other? And the answer is yes, this or that or the other. It's partly funding, money, reward for what you do. Number two, it's another opportunity to do something very different. If you wanted to do something like Ramo did, he had a special set of reasons, but to start something new, which was ballistic missile defense. Our company wasn't going to get into that. Therefore, here's an opportunity. I'm going to go capitalize on the opportunity. The third one, of course, as you sort of said, was compensation. We had no, until GM bought us, we had no public stock offerings or stock holding on our part, so we had none of the equity. Some of the people were very irritated about that because if they made a very successful company that was earning a lot of money and was expanding, they would like to share that, but they couldn't because you could have no equity membership. So there's three reasons. At the Ramo Wooldridge time, the principal and almost only reason, although that compensation was part of it, was frustration dealing with this guy. He had a set of rules. You could not do anything without his permission. You'd try to get his permission. You'd never hear from him. So you just hang there. They couldn't stand that. Well, I couldn't stand that either. You probably can't stand it either. You'd like to get something resolved, and especially if you have let's say you had 15,000 people trying to show that go this way, but you can't do it because he won't say yes. By the way, just one more thing about that. He gave Howard Hughes directed Pat Hyland when he was hired to be the new manager, only 3 rules. You can't purchase any real estate without my approval. You cannot change the company name from Hughes Aircraft Company. You cannot change the color of the buildings, which are going to be green. That's literally true. So we had this stuff called sea-mist green. Some of us called it bilious green, which was used to color the buildings. And I understand from Mr. Ratkovich, one thing he's not going to restore is the green color. And I said, I insist. Well, we can still petition him because it's going to take a year to do the reconstruction.
Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.